last Parshat in Sefer Breshit, which is Parshat Vayechi, and it has in it something very special, which I'd like to share with each and every one of you. Because every Friday, some people have the tradition to bless their children. And the blessing that they say to their daughters is that, may you be as great as our matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. However, when it comes to giving a bracha to the boys, and some maybe understand what I'm doing, I'm not dancing, based on our Parsha, we find that Yaakov gave a blessing to his grandchildren, and we also say, may our boys be as great as Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Now, there's only one small problem. Who's Ephraim and Manasseh? We know so much about Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but we may not. Oh, yes. Very good. That is true. That's excellent. That is true. Ephraim and Manasseh are Yosef's sons. The question is, why do we bless our children that they should be like Yosef's sons when we don't really know too much about them? Well, hopefully today I'll let you know one important thing about them. And the way I'd like to do that is by sharing with you the following story. There were these two brothers, one by the name of Yankel and the other Moshela. And they were really nice to one another. And one day they were able to get this huge field. And because it came from their family, they decided that the way it should be divided is right down the middle. So this way, Moshe will be able to have half the field, in which he'll be able to plant and get a whole lot of grain and a lot of things to be able to put into his storage house, to his silo. And Moshe can do that, and Yaakov will do the same. But there was only one difference between Moshe and Yaakov. Moshela was a person who was married, and he happened to have a lot of kids, 6 to be exact. Yaakov did not have any children, and he was not married. So Moshe was thinking, Moshe's the married guy, he said, I have all my children that help me in my field, and when I get a little bit older, I'll be able to have them help me out. So it's not really fair that they end up having the same amount as my brother, because my brother is all by himself, and he's not able to make as much and to be able to do as much, especially when he gets older. So he came up with a great idea. Even though they both had their own separate places where they kept all their grain, he said, in the middle of the night, I'm going to go into my storage house, and I'm going to fill up a bag filled with grain, and I'm going to bring it over to my brother's storage house. And that's what he did. He filled up a bag filled with grain, and he brought it all the way over to his brother's place. The problem was, the very next morning, for some reason, all of the grain was put right back into his place, into his storage house. Following along so far? So he said, this doesn't make any sense. In the middle of the night, I took a big bag of grain, and I put it in my brother's storage house, and the next morning, for some reason, all the grain in my storage house is full. I didn't end up losing anything. So he said, I better ask someone who's much smarter than me. Someone who's extremely wise. His wife, of course. What did you think I was going to say? So he said, I don't understand what's going on. So his wife said, you're doing it in the middle of the night. You probably don't realize how much grain you really have from the night before. And the truth is, you may not have so much in your storage house. So he said, okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to make sure tonight, before I go, at the end of the day, while it's still light outside, I'm going to make sure to count all of the stuff in my storage house to make sure I know exactly how much I have. And he did. And that night, around 2 o'clock, middle of the night, going around, once again, he took another big bag, filled the grain, and he brought it over to his brother's storage house. But guess what happened the next morning when he woke up? What do you think happened over there? It went all the way back, right? Okay, you guys are following along. Good, okay. So he said, there's something fishy going on. This is not good. I'm calling the police. So he called the police, and he said, there's been a break-in. Someone keeps breaking into my storage house. And the police officer said, that's terrible. Well, I know you have a lot of grain. It's a lot of money. How much did they take? Because you don't understand. Someone's coming into my storage house, and they're putting food into it. Hello? Hello? And all of a sudden the police officer, for some reason, didn't think it was such an important question anymore. It's like, why is someone coming to your place to put things in? Doesn't make sense. You I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. This night, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to bring my handy-dandy... Hope it works. We'll see. Okay, so, again, he took all his grain, brought it over, and he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sleep by the doorway of my storage house. And he fell asleep. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, about an hour later, he heard footsteps. And he knew there was someone coming. He jumped up, turned on his flashlight. Well, let's imagine that it works. He puts his flashlight, he goes, hey! Who is that? Puts the flashlight right into that person's face. Moshela said, hey! I see you with a big bag. Who is that? Put the flashlight right to him. And guess who it was? His brother, Yankov. So he said, Yankov, what are you doing here in the middle of the night with this big bag of grain? And Yankov said, so what are you doing with the middle of the night with a flashlight? What are you doing? And he goes, well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you what. Every night, because I love you so much, my brother, I bring grain because I know that you're single and it's hard for you to be able to make so much grain. So Yankov smiled and said, my brother Moshela, that's precisely why every night I wake up in the middle of the night. Because I'm a single man. I can live off just a small amount of food. But you have a very large family. So therefore, that's the reason why every night I bring grain to you. And they both smiled and hugged in a very warm, loving embrace. And that is the story of Moshela and Yankov. But when I think of this story, I think of the entire story of the entire book of Vayechi. Because when we think about brothers, we don't always find the greatest storyline. We find by Cain and Hevel, the first brothers of Adam and Eve, they didn't like each other very much as they got into a very large fight. Abraham had 2 sons, Yitzchak and Ishmael. They didn't get along very well. Of course, Yitzchak had twins, Yaakov and Esau. And were they the best of friends? Not at all. And then even Yaakov's sons, when we know the story of Yosef, Yosef was ultimately sold to Egypt by his own brothers. So although there's so much good and so much that we can learn from, unfortunately, we find that sometimes people did not get along. Ephraim and Manasseh, those two brothers, is the exception. Those two brothers cared for each other, loved each other, and when they received their blessing together, both of them accepted it happily. And therefore, because of that, even though, of course, we want to bless our children like Abraham in his kindness, Yitzchak in his devotion to serving Hashem, Yaakov with his Torah study, Yosef with his great leadership, we want to bless our children that they should be nice to one another, like Ephraim and Manasseh. And the truth is, we all are brothers and sisters. All of us are like one, as one nation, as Am Echad. And therefore, we have to remind ourselves that we also have to think of, just like Moshela and Yaakov, how to do for another person, how to think for another person, and how to care for one another. So my blessing to each and every one of you is no different from the blessing that Yaakov gave to his grandchildren. Yisimcha Elokim K'Ephraim K'Manasseh. Shabbat Shalom, everybody!
Shabbat Shalom.